Thank you for staying with us. New York has recently passed a series of laws, including the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act of 2019, Stop Sexual Harassment in New York City Act, and the new Illegal Alien Guidance. What are these laws and how might they affect you? Here to give us more information and provide insight on these topics is attorney and host of Today's Verdict, David Lesch.
Hi, Veronica. Nice
David,
to see you again. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the work you've been doing on my show. Whenever you would do the interviews, it's been great.
It's been great.
So we have a lot to talk about today. I don't know how much I'm going to get into, how much I can actually get through, but there are three different acts I want to talk about. The first one is the Stop Sexual Harassment Act. It is in effect. Employers have until the end of the year to do some training, and we're gonna get a little bit into it. And some of the things about the act that I think are confusing. I've had sexual harassment cases in my office. I've tried these cases. There was one in particular where I actually brought a lawsuit against Medgar Evers College because some ladies were being discriminated and sexually harassed by a supervisor. They were taking care of babies or children for some of the students. This was staff.
Okay.
And I had to sue the supervisor and I had to sue the school. And what I can or cannot present as to evidence is very important in these types of cases. And that's why this act is so important, because I think it also gives me more ammunition to be able to hold certain companies and corporations responsible for sexual harassment. So let me explain to you why.
I was going to say, like, how are we being protected with this act?
So if you are a company and you have 15 or more employees, and when I say employees, they don't necessarily have to be paid, they could be interns. So you could have 5 paid employees and 10 interns, that still covers. The employer is mandated to do sexual harassment training. In other words, has to take at least a 45-minute course to learn how to train, and then train all the employees to make sure each employee understands what the term sexual harassment is, examples of what's considered to be harassment, how to make sure that it's reported properly and put down in writing. All these things an employer is responsible to do. Within 90 days of a new hire, that particular person who's hired has to be trained by the employer. And this all has to be done by the end of the year.
Okay.
Once it is done, every year from there on, it has to be done again. At least there has to be at least one mandatory training within the year. The question is, well, let's say if you do it November of this year, even though you had to the end of the year to this end of December, can you wait to the end of December next year, or do you have to go from November? These are all things that have to be worked out. No one's quite sure.
What are the consequences for these employers if they don't offer these trainings to their staff?
All right. First of all, they could be fined by New York State. All right. That's the first thing that could happen. They could also, if there's a lawsuit, evidence, it's per se evidence against them if they didn't take the training. So let's say, for instance, I'm representing somebody here. Unfortunately, would be bringing an action against a corporation, BronxNet, or something that way. I would say, well, was training done? Answer is no. Well, that's per se evidence that you didn't take the responsibility that you needed to do. So that's the first thing. But then the question as a trial attorney is, well, if BronxNet goes farther than that, or another corporation goes farther than that in terms of their training, can I say, well, you didn't do what a corporation would be required to do normally, or can I use more evidence against you? So these are things that have to be looked at. But there are some other loopholes here, so I just want to talk about it. First of all, what if you live in Connecticut, but you come into New York City a couple of days a week? Well, you would be considered to be an employee that needs to be trained. Right. What if you're Skyping in, but you actually don't put your feet in New York City? You'd still be considered.
As long as you're in New York State or a city?
City.
As long as you're a New York City employee,
yes, you put your feet in New York City. That's very, very important. Well,
now, is the individual fined if they decide not to take this training under their employer?
No, it's the employer that's going to be
responsible.
It's always on the employer. Okay. But now the employee might say, well, look, I was already trained in Connecticut, or I was trained in New Jersey. You don't have to be trained again. But it's still, this act has to be worked out.
Yes.
But what's important is we're finally recognizing that we're putting the burden on employers to train the employees to make sure they understand what is considered to be harassment. Whether you're a waitress or a waiter and you're harassed by customers or by your supervisor behind the counter. These are all things, and they give you examples in the training as to what would or would not be considered sexual harassment. So listen, so this has a lot more to go. There's a lot more to go on it.
But like you said, I'm glad that now they're putting on the employers to provide a safe place for the employees.
Yeah.
But sticking on harassment, just because we don't have a lot of time, I want to really go quickly to the housing stability and tenant protection of 2019. So
this is a game changer, you know, which I really, which is a long time coming. I mean, if you're a tenant, this has been your year in New York City, all right? Because when you're talking about rent stabilization laws, they've always really tilted a little bit in the favor of the landlord. And just to give you a little bit of a background, if you have a rent stabilized apartment, landlords are looking to destabilize the apartment and bring it up to market value.
Right.
That's how they make their money. And in the past, I think 15, almost 20 years, 300,000 apartments have been destabilized. That means these are apartments that have been lost to the community that normally would not be able to afford it, but we've given them an ability to be able to stay there.
Right.
They've left New York City because they can't afford to stay there. Well, I think we've had enough of that. So basically the legislature has made it much more difficult for landlords to destabilize their apartment. How do they do that? How have they made it more difficult? First of all, if it was vacant, like immediately vacant, somebody left, the landlord could do it. No, you can't do that anymore. Right? They have to give you a certain amount of time. You can't just immediately
find someone
who might be able to get in there. Exactly, at that price. They've also said, well, the landlord would say, well, I'm putting a family member in. Well, is it an immediate family member? Now you have to give reasons why that family member can't live someplace else. This was just an excuse to really to get somebody else to get
somebody in there to hold on to the apartment.
Exactly.
Right.
So also, this was a good one. What landlords would do would say, well, we're putting capital improvements into the building, and therefore we can raise the rent up to a certain amount, which would then make the tenant say, I'm leaving. It all would flow. Well, now New York City, the legislature says, no, you can't do capital improvements more than a certain amount of time and only so much, and even if you do, you can only raise up a certain amount. And that was big because landlords would say, well, I'm improving the building. So therefore, the tenant has to pay for it. But the tenant would say, well, I don't need the extra shower curtain, or I don't need these things that you're putting in there. You're using it as a way to raise the rent, and I can't stay, and that's not really fair. So there are so many different protections here that we can talk about. It was extending the rent overcharge look-back period to 4 to 6 years. If your if your landlord was overcharging you, you could only look back 4 years. Now you can look back 6 years.
Wow.
I mean, there's so many different things in here that, landlords are very unhappy, and I think they're bringing a lawsuit to try and overchange this.
Well, hopefully they don't
I don't
win.
think it's going to happen. Let's
I
move
don't
on
think
to
so.
the last one
We
here.
only have a minute.
I could do it in a minute.
Okay, let's do it in a minute.
I could do it in a minute.
60-second rundown.
Okay.
On this new topic.
I could do it.
About
New York City bans the use of the term illegal alien.
Okay.
Right? Don't use that term anymore. Even if the person isn't here legally, you're really not supposed to use the term illegal alien. You want to use the term, use undocumented immigrant. It's considered to be discrimination to call somebody an illegal alien. You could be fined $25,000 for doing that.
Wow.
A lot of people feel it's an invasion against your First Amendment right. You should be able to say illegal alien, especially when the federal immigration laws, such as USC 1365, actually say they use the term illegal alien in the federal law. But New York State doesn't care. New York State says, look, we don't like the term. I don't care what the federal government does. Don't use the term illegal alien. It's discrimination. And certainly don't say, if you don't do something that you're supposed to do, I'm going to call 311 or the Department of Buildings because you're an illegal alien.
About it.
Don't use illegal alien.
David, thank you so much for always providing us with so much good information.
I did it. I got it all.
You got it all done.
I did
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
See you soon.
If you need answers to difficult legal issues, David's got you covered. Connect with him on Facebook and Twitter at Today's Verdict. And tune into Today's Verdict on Tuesdays at 6:30 p.m. right here on BronxNet TV. We have to take a quick break, but we'll be right back after this.